Fog drifts across a narrow peninsula. Wooden houses creak. Church bells cut through salt air. In this video, I use modern AI tools to breathe life into forgotten paintings and maps, allowing us to walk through scenes that haven't been seen by human eyes for centuries. Together, we will step into Boston before it became a symbol, when it was still raw, fearful, defiant, and slowly learning how to become a revolution. If we shift our perspective downward, past the modern skyline and the filled land beneath it, Boston begins as something fragile. The Shawmut Peninsula in the early 1600s is narrow, uneven, and surrounded by tidal mudflats that breathe in and out with the sea. 3 hills rise sharply from the earth, rocky and exposed, like knuckles breaking through skin. This is not a city yet. It is an idea clinging to geography. Notice the detail in early engravings. Small timber houses huddled together, not for beauty, but for survival. Roofs are steep, meant to shed snow. Walls are thin, always leaking cold. Smoke coils upward from crude chimneys, carrying the smell of wet wood and salted fish. The air tastes briny, mixed with animal waste and the constant dampness of the Atlantic wind. Every sound carries: the creak of leather boots, the thud of barrels unloaded from boats, the low murmur of prayer. This is Puritan Boston, founded not as a marketplace, but a moral experiment. The settlers believe the land is chosen, watched, judged. The harbor is their lifeline. Ships arrive rarely, and when they do, crowds gather instinctively, hungry for news from England. Letters, sermons, rumors, everything arrives by sea. The water defines time itself. This peninsula will not survive intact. Over centuries, it will be reshaped, filled, flattened, expanded. Hills will be carved down, shorelines will vanish. But here, in its earliest form, Shawmut feels precarious, temporary, as if God could reclaim it with a single storm. That tension between divine purpose and human vulnerability will shape Boston's soul forever. Now, step inland. The trees thin. The ground opens. Boston Common appears, not as a park, but as a contested space. Established in 1634, it is both shared and watched. Cows graze here, bells clanking softly as they move. Mud churns under hooves. Children shout, then fall silent when adults pass. This is public land, but nothing here is truly free. If we listen closely, we hear the layered sounds of authority. Drums roll as militia units assemble, muskets catching dull light. Orders are shouted, boots strike earth in rhythm. On another day, a crowd forms for a punishment. A scaffold stands at the edge of the common. The air feels tight. No one speaks loudly. Justice here is meant to be seen. Notice the contradiction. This open space is meant to symbolize unity, yet it reinforces control. Sermons spill outward from nearby churches, their warnings carried by the wind. Sin is not private in Puritan Boston. It is communal, corrected in full view. The common absorbs it all: fear, obedience, resistance, boredom. As centuries pass, this ground will soften. Trees will be planted deliberately. Paths will curve. The common will become a refuge. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, it is a stage. Everything important happens here, or ends here. Executions, celebrations, military send-offs. The ground is packed hard by generations of footsteps, as if history itself has compressed the soil. This space survives, but its meaning mutates. What began as moral discipline slowly becomes civic identity. And Boston learns, here, that power is strongest when it gathers people together, whether they want to be gathered or not. If we shift our perspective again, narrowing our view, the city closes in around us. Colonial Boston streets are not avenues, they are corridors. Cornhill, King Street, they twist and bend without planning, shaped by foot traffic and convenience rather than vision. Buildings lean toward each other like conspirators. Upper floors jut outward, blocking sunlight. The soundscape is relentless. Wagon wheels clatter over uneven stones, iron rims shriek, horses snort, vendors shout prices for bread, fish, imported cloth. The smell is overwhelming. Manure, tallow, smoke, raw meat, spilled ale. Drainage runs down the center of the street carrying filth toward the harbor. This is where class collides. Merchants in wool coats brush past laborers stained with tar. British soldiers move in groups, redcoats bright against the grime. Conversations stop when they pass. Tension lives in the pauses. King Street especially hums with unease. This is commerce layered with occupation. Taverns overflow at night, voices loud, arguments louder. Windows glow with candlelight. Inside, whispers of resistance circulate alongside rumors of crackdowns. By day, it is trade. By night, it is politics. These streets no longer exist as they once did. They have been widened, renamed, erased. But here, in their pre-industrial form, they are alive, crowded, dangerous, intimate. Revolution is not born in grand halls alone. It grows in alleys, over mugs of beer, in spaces where bodies press close and tempers rise quickly. The city learns how anger moves, how fear spreads, how crowds form. These streets teach Boston how to rebel.
Now we enter a space that still stands, but not as it once felt. The Old South Meeting House rises above surrounding roofs, its brick exterior severe, its windows tall and watchful. Inside, the ceiling soars. Wooden benches pack the floor tightly, bodies press together shoulder to shoulder. The air is hot, thick with breath and anticipation. If we listen carefully, we hear voices overlapping, not prayers, arguments. This is no longer only a church, it is a pressure chamber. Thousands gather here, far more than the building was meant to hold. Boots scuff wood, papers rustle, someone coughs, someone shouts agreement, someone else shouts back. Notice the emotional shift. Fear is present, but so is resolve. The words spoken here do not drift upward toward God, they spread outward toward action. Taxation, representation, defiance. Each phrase lands heavily, echoing against beams darkened by age. Outside, British authority waits. Inside, American identity is forming, imperfect, angry, determined. The meeting house becomes a hinge point, a place where thought turns into movement. This building survives, but its past intensity is invisible unless we reconstruct it. Today, it is quieter, but in the 1770s, it vibrates. The floorboards remember the weight of history pressing down on them. And it is from gatherings like this that Boston crosses a line, away from protest toward revolution.
If we shift our perspective toward the edge of the peninsula, night settles in. December 1773. The harbor is black glass, barely moving. Griffin's Wharf creaks softly underfoot, wooden planks slick with cold salt air. Lantern light flickers, revealing faces half hidden beneath cloaks. No one laughs, no one speaks loudly. Every sound feels dangerous. Notice the smell: tar, rope, seawater, wet wool. Ships loom beside the dock like sleeping beasts. The Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver. Their hulls rise dark and heavy, filled with tea that has become a symbol of insult. Boots thud softly as men climb aboard, disguised not to fool others, but to harden themselves. Axes bite into chests, wood cracks open. Tea spills out, cascading into the water like black snow. The harbor absorbs it silently. There is no cheering. This is not celebration. It is resolve made physical. Griffin's Wharf will not survive. It will vanish beneath landfill and time. But here, rebellion crosses a point of no return. Property is destroyed openly. Authority is challenged directly. The act is theatrical, yes, but also disciplined. No other cargo is touched, no crew harmed. The revolution does not explode here. It crystallizes, and the harbor, witness to it all, carries the evidence away on the tide.
By day, the harbor is chaos. If we widen our view, masts crowd the skyline, forest-like. Sails snap in the wind, ropes strain. Dock workers shout in overlapping rhythms. Barrels roll, cranes groan. The smell is sharp. Fish, salt, sweat, rum. This is Boston's bloodstream. Everything flows through here. Goods, people, ideas, rumors. Legal trade blurs into smuggling with ease. Customs officers watch carefully and miss much. Warehouses line the shore, packed tight, their doors opening and closing endlessly. Notice the diversity. Sailors from the Caribbean, England, Africa, the Mediterranean. Languages mix, songs rise and fall. At night, taverns near the docks glow warmly, spilling laughter and violence in equal measure. This harbor teaches Boston how power really works, not in laws alone, but in control of movement. When Britain tightens its grip here, resentment deepens everywhere. Blockades choke the city, wharves fall silent, hunger creeps in. Over time, the shoreline will be reshaped beyond recognition. Land will be filled, piers extended, but the harbor's role remains constant: connector, corrupter, catalyst. Without it, Boston is provincial. With it, Boston becomes dangerous to empires. Now we climb. Beacon Hill rises steep and commanding, one of the original 3 hills. The ascent is uneven. Stone steps, dirt paths, breath shortens. From the top, the city spreads below, dense, noisy, alive. The harbor glints beyond. This elevation is not accidental. Here live the powerful, merchants, politicians, influencers of their age. Homes are larger, better built. Brick replaces wood. Windows are wider. From here, one can watch ships arrive and know fortunes before others do. Notice the silence compared to the streets below. Fewer wheels, fewer voices. Wind replaces noise. Power likes quiet. It also likes visibility. Beacons once burned here, warning of danger, guiding ships. Symbolically, Beacon Hill becomes a place of oversight. But this hill will be cut down, its height reduced, its slopes softened. Landfill will erase its dominance. Yet in this era it shapes perspective, literally and politically. Decisions made here ripple downward. Revolution is not only born among crowds, it is negotiated, debated, sometimes restrained from places like this, where distance from noise allows reflection and control feels possible. If we leap forward in time, the city looks confident, dense, industrial. Brick and stone dominate, gas lamps glow, commerce hums. Then, fire. November 1872. Flames leap from building to building with terrifying speed. Wind drives sparks across rooftops.
Bells ring frantically. Crowds surge through streets choked with smoke. The roar is constant. Fire, collapsing walls, shouted orders. Notice the heat. It presses against skin, steals breath. Firefighters fight bravely and lose. Water pressure fails. Buildings fall like dominoes. By morning, much of downtown is gone. This destruction is not the end. It is transformation. Boston rebuilds stronger, wider, taller. The medieval tangle of streets gives way to modern order. Loss clears the way for reinvention. The old city dies here. A new one rises. Memory lingers beneath foundations.
If we step back now, the pattern becomes clear. These streets, muddy, crowded, burning, shaped more than a city. They shaped an identity. Boston learned how to endure, resist, and rebuild. Each layer of destruction made room for defiance. If you could spend just 1 hour in this lost version of Boston, which specific building or hidden alleyway would you visit first? Your choice reveals a lot about the traveler you are. Let me know in the comments. Bringing these lost worlds back to life takes hundreds of hours of AI processing and historical research. If you value this journey into our collective past, hit subscribe and join our community of time travelers. Together, we will ensure these stories are never forgotten. And tell me, where should we go next? Which city, which era still waits to be seen again?